Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Knife Guy. What are we talking about today? So, this is a subject that I have tackled before, and it's also a subject that I have pulled before, if you've been around on my channel for a long time. But I just love being right. A lot of you know that about me, that I will go way out of my way to prove my point, even over months or years, multiple times. And this just happened again. And it's always a joy to talk about this, not just for the pleasure of being correct, but also because it's genuinely beneficial information for people who aren't aware or just assume. And what is this that people assume? Well, the quote is, and this is so common. This is something that I get every day, at least every single day, and over the course of the year, probably hundreds, if not thousands of times over all of my different social media platforms. The exact quote is, people who buy expensive knives are definitely not really using them. And more specifically, I get, it's got to be less than 1% of people. This is so common. All of you have read this comment before. Many of you have thought it. Number one, this is a comment that almost exclusively comes from people who don't actually buy these knives. Not always, but this is a quote that commonly comes from people who are not buying. Now, I know that people want to come up with arguments. You're like, I know the poll you're referencing. I know that the way that you worded it, complex, I got a bunch of things to say. Hold on. Number one, the poll is based on what these people assume about expensive knives. And truthfully, most of these people are saying these things about knives that cost around $200 and up. That's the vast majority of people, right? And like I said, it's coming from people who it's an inconceivable thing to them that a human being would go out and give money to another person or entity or business, receiving a $200 pocket knife, an item that they have up to this moment perceived to be an object that cannot in any way exceed the cost of whatever they're used to buying, right? This is the bubble that is created. It's the common bubble. It's a bubble that I used to be in. It's a bubble that most of us used to be in, but this is the consistency here, right? That's what it's based on, right? I'm going to let you guys look at the poll, and there's no way around these numbers because this time we got 10,000 votes. I don't care how you look at it. That's way too many people to chalk it up to a goof up, right? You can see here I gave three options, and the way that it was worded was, if you own, if you're somebody who purchases knives that cost $500 or more, I didn't even go $200. I went up to $500, right? Just to prove it. Do you have at least one that you regularly EDC and use? I think I put something like responsibly, right? Not abuse. We're going to talk more about abuse later because this is something that people are going to try and use as a trump card in this argument, right? But I made it very clear, like, there has to be at least one knife that you've purchased that costs $500 or more that you actually use and use regularly and use responsibly as a knife, right? I gave three options. 1, yes. 2, no. Or 3, I don't own any knives that cost $500 or more. That way we got a pretty clear view of the numbers. Yes, people can lie, right? There were 10,000 voters. So even if you add in a percentage of people who might be fibbing a bit on one side or the other, this is a lot of people. Now, I knew what these numbers would end up being roughly, but I was actually, this time it was even more, right? We had 31%. That's 3,100 people roughly of 10,000 voters that own and use at least one knife regularly that costs $500 or more, right? This is of my audience. I understand the numbers are going to be different if we poll different, audiences, right, from different content creators or wherever, right? We only had 10% that were purist collectors at this price point, right? That's about a 1,000 people. So we are now, because again, the idea here, the argument is what percentage of people buying this stuff are actually using it. So the rest of the people who are not owning these things or buying these things, we can now separate it and focus on these numbers. That's a lot of people right there. Immediately obliterates the argument that 1% or less of people who buy knives at don't even worry about 200 or more, 500 or more, right? But just these people buying this stuff. What the vast majority, right? This is 75% of the people voting who actually buy this stuff. 75% have one or more, right? Now, you do not need to spend, I want people to understand my perspective on this. You do not need to spend $500 on a knife to have a good tool. I am not trying to shame anyone out of a specific budget. I have a very specific point to make that directly combats an insanely common and incorrect presumptuous statement. Something that I have gotten constantly over 7 years on social media, right? You buy what you like. You can buy a $50 knife, and if it works for you, great, right? That's fine. I'm not trying to shame anybody, right? Obviously, as the price goes up, if we were to poll everyone on $700 knives, $900 knives, $1,200 knives, obviously this starts to change. The user percentage goes down and the collector percentage goes up. I would venture to guess, as we hit the $1,000 and up mark, it dramatically flip-flops. But I would guess, this is just a guess, and maybe at some point in the future we can poll it again. I would venture to guess up to $1,000. We would still have the majority of the buyers owning and using at least one, right? Lots and lots and lots of people in this specific tier, right, are both users and collectors. At this price point, companies are definitely making more enthusiast level pocket knives, but it is silly and ridiculous to assume that these knives are made solely for collectors and people who are shopping in this territory, buying knives in this territory, experiencing knives in this territory will 100% tell you the same thing. You have a wide spectrum of the different types of knives that are created, but the vast majority, even at this price point, which again is, oh my God, that can't be possible. These are $500, $600, $700 knives. They're obviously but ask yourself, are you actually buying this stuff? Are you actually experiencing it? Or are you just looking at pictures on the internet and guessing, right? People don't want to admit it. Nobody's going to be able to say, yeah, I regularly purchase this stuff and I can confidently say that none of this stuff is meant to be used. It's all 100% meant to be collected. And the vast majority of people are lying about use and they're all just collecting it. No one's going to be able to say that. And there's no way, right? It's just not, that's not a realistic perspective, right? If you think that, you're probably not buying it, which is okay. You don't have to get to that point. Nobody does, right? It's not 100% necessary. And you shouldn't feel shamed or feel like you're not in a special club for not having purchased a knife at this price point. I want to be really careful with that, right? I think you should enjoy and use whatever you want, right? The other thing that I found really interesting, there are hundreds of comments, right? So I think another big argument against this data, right, is, okay, all right, but the vast majority of what these people are buying is getting collected. Maybe they have one or two users, right? But the rest of it are all save queens. Pump the brakes. Look through those comments. That argument is also immediately unraveled. I was really surprised to see, because I am the type of collector who is majority collector. Now, I own about 340 pocket knives. How many knives do I own that are 500 plus? Quite a few. But I'm an extreme example. I am not a typical knife collector. Most people are not me. I'm not trying to say I'm cool or I'm better than anybody. I'm just saying factually, most people don't have 340 knives sitting in their knife collection, and probably over 100 that are five. I have no idea. I don't count them, right? I don't go over and regularly keep track of the value of my collection. I can say confidently that I'm on the side where the majority of my 500 plus knives I don't use. I just like to have them. Right? I'm not against using a lot of them. They just don't see a lot of use because it's hard to use every single thing. But I have tons of knives that are 500 plus and user, right? Or nearly there, right? User, right? Those don't even look dirty. It's because people who buy this stuff regularly maintain and clean it, as I proved with the rocks that he go to. A dirty knife is proof of nothing except that you don't clean it. A knife that is destroyed is proof of nothing except for the fact that you are probably using the wrong tool for the job. I don't know where people get this collective idea that this is something to be prideful of. You have mud and dirt on your knife. Congratulations, clean it. Soap and water, compressed air, a little bit of oil will remove any evidence that you are priding yourself on, right? Again, a knife that's scratched up, right? Sure. I mean, that's evidence of use, right? Fine. But a knife that's totally destroyed and completely broken, I guess congratulations. It seems like maybe we should consider using a different tool next time, right? So the people who are buying this stuff and using it, most of them are probably maintaining them, at least, maybe not at the same pace, but most people are taking care of these things, using them for knife tasks, cleaning them off when they're done, storing them properly, right? You're going to see a common consistency there. It's the same type of thing that you see with anybody who is investing what most people consider to be a large amount of money into anything. You probably want to take care of it. Most people are not throwing money out the window, right? Contrary to what, again, people who don't buy this stuff would assume. There's some ironies in this, right? But yeah, look through the comments. A huge percentage of the people actually buying and using this stuff, a huge percentage, are users. You'll see that over and over and over again, right? And I know I can already hear people going, well, they're lying. They must be. Because I can't imagine it. Because I wouldn't buy this stuff. Because I wouldn't use it if I bought it, right? That's the common denominator there. You're assuming. There's too many people for that to be that consistent. Too many people who have a pure user collection of knives. Never mind what you think about the necessity of it, right? It's not your decision. People buying and hoarding and collecting knives, they shouldn't do it. It's not your decision, though. You can cry and scream all you want. Not your decision. No matter how much you repeat it, not your decision, not your money. So all you can do is just type, right? And that's, some people, maybe that's how they vent, right? I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know why people are so aggressive about this argument, right? But if that's what you need to do, fine. But it's right there. Again, it's too many people. And it's a dramatic majority. A dramatic one. Not a slight, it's a dramatic one, right? It's there. Like I said earlier, excuse me, pulling audiences from different content creators will definitely yield different results here. In terms of how many people are purchasing knives that cost $500 or more. Yeah, my audience, for sure. If you guys watch my content, I cover tons of knives that are hyper expensive, way over the top of $500. So there's a gathering of people here who are much more likely to purchase $500 knives. But again, that's not the point. We are separating the people who don't from the people who do and focusing on what percentage of the people who do, right? What percentage of those people are using them? That is the argument. It's not what percentage of people are buying less expensive knives, and is that the majority over more expensive knives? Obviously. It will always be that. It doesn't matter whose audience you're looking at. More people will buy less expensive knives. The vast majority of people on earth won't even spend anywhere near $50 on a knife, right? I would venture to guess the average person is probably comfortable spending $10 to $20 on a pocket knife, right? This is obvious. This is not news. This is not the argument. So I want you guys, I know what the comments are going to fill up with, so I'm trying to head all of this off so that we can focus on this one point. The whole idea here is not that I'm trying to celebrate my correctness. I am a little bit petty. I'm not going to lie, but I do love being right. But at the same time, it's also healthy for people to see this, for people to get actual information from people, actual feedback, discuss this with people who are not within their own little bubble of thinking, so that you can get a different perspective on it. Not to turn you into a buyer of this, not to force you into thinking that you have to buy this stuff or should buy this stuff. No, not at all. It's just important to get different perspectives. It's important to understand it rather than guess or assume, just like everything else, right? So, yeah, if we were to poll, I don't know who's a good, a good example, right? But there are definitely major content creators who don't focus on the more expensive end of the knife world. And you pull them, and you're going to get a much smaller percentage with this exact question, a much smaller percentage of people who are actually buying knives that cost this much, and a much larger percentage of people who are buying less expensive knives. But again, of that smaller percentage, if we were to poll those people specifically, how many of you are actually using this stuff? It will always be the majority. If we're hovering right around $500, I don't care who you poll, right? You'd have to change the question to get a different percentage. I think the way that I worded this was very, very fair. I think there's a million different ways to word this to get more specific or different answers, right? But if you word it like this, which is, again, directly meant to combat and prove a point versus this incredibly common statement that I get, this very presumptuous statement that I get from thousands of people yearly on social media. You word it just like this, it's always going to be, of that percentage, the majority are using them and are not like, oh, I'm cutting an envelope. That's what people are going to say. Again, the comments, that undoes it undoes that. It unravels that part of the argument. This is undeniable proof, and it's not the first time I've done it. Beyond that, it's not hard to find video evidence of this, right? It's not like every single person who is buying a $500 pocket knife is uploading specific video evidence of their use and maintenance of this knife, mainly because they don't care what people think, right? I don't mind going to war on their behalf, but most of these people are not thinking like, gosh, I immediately have to provide evidence of my use of it. No, you're not going to see that. But at the same time, YouTube is abundant with people using this stuff. I mean, I honestly don't know how people don't, if they're even remotely interested in knives, how are you not finding videos of people using knives in this territory? I mean, we have a lot of it. Neves Knives, Cedric and Ada, we have Erica EDC, we got Super Seal Steve. I mean, just off the top of my head, there's tons of people in like a very obvious, you don't need binoculars or a telescope, they're just right there. They're all over the place, right? But anyways, a couple other things I wanted to point out. I'm very passionate about this. I know people are going to argue with me, and I'm ready. Just let me know, or just know I'm ready to argue with you in a friendly way, right? As I always have been. The other argument that we get against this, or against people buying expensive knives, is they won't abuse them though. That's what my beaters are for. I love how this is always presented as like the ace in the hole, right? The hammer drop. As if that's the definitive, there's no way to argue against that, right? I would say true. I would say people who buy $500 pocket knives are probably not abusing them. That's very insightful. But consider this. Most people who use their knives, their nice knives, or buy nice knives are using them correctly, as a knife should be used, which does not involve abuse. We have been taught by strategic marketing and by some questionable characters here and there that a knife should withstand forces that are so beyond reasonable, right? And when it does, circumstantially, it is beautiful marketing. Cold steel. Sorry. Oh, man, I still have this cough. But, man, it really grabs a hold of people, right? They're caring for them and maintaining them. Again, that's a huge part of the reason that they usually look clean, right? It's not that they're afraid to use them so much. It's more that people who like are saying that I really use I'm a true user, right? I may not be buying $200, $300, $400, $500 knives, but I use my stuff, right? And the evidence is always like a rusted out, destroyed knife. Okay, so this works against you here because it's much more likely that what you're defining as real use is, in fact, the exact word that you use. It's abuse. It's the wrong way to use a knife. MC from the future here, just want to put this in here real quick. I probably shouldn't have said it's the wrong way to use a knife because it's your property. You bought it, right? You can use it however you want, right? What I'm saying is that the way that you use a knife and what you consider to be proper use is going to differ probably in a million different ways than anybody else, right? So it's not necessarily always right or wrong, but I would, consider asking yourself, like, if the way that I'm using my tools renders them useless or nearly useless, right? Or it destroys them, is that the right way? That's all I'm saying. Anyways, back to the video. So essentially what you're doing, what you don't mind doing, is destroying an inexpensive tool that is definitely not meant for this level of abuse. Prying, screwing, all of that. You don't mind beating it up because, hey, it's cheap. It's a tool, right? So why not toss the money out the window? Ironic, because that's usually the way that people describe people who buy $500 tools. How many of these have it? And people say, "Oh well, I'm using the same $20 knife I've had for years. It's sharp, it's razor sharp, and it's in perfect condition." I mean, come on. It gets more ridiculous the more that you dig into it. It's so simple. It's very, very simple. People who buy less expensive knives probably have less reservations against using them. Nothing wrong with that, but you have a higher percentage of people who buy less expensive knives who view them as disposable tools. They break them, they lose them, whatever, because they're cheap. So you replace them, right? Over and over and over and over again. And you end up spending a ton of money on knives or tools like this when you could just use the right tool for the job and have the thing last a lot longer, right? Like a screwdriver, a pry bar, whatever, hammer in some specific cases. And then you can use your knife as a knife. Again, you don't need to buy a super expensive pocket knife, right? What I'm saying is a lot of times these arguments come from people who are just abusing their knives and throwing money away, which is, I think, super funny. But again, I used to think like that. It's easy for me to identify with, to highlight this and isolate it because I definitely came from this perspective. I thought, man, I got my user pocket knives, but a nice one would be cool. But if I bought it, I'd never use it, right? Obviously, like who's really using this stuff? Oh, it's so common. That's where you start. So many of us that end up at or near the same position I am, which is, again, not a position anybody has to get to. So many of us started, in fact, all of us in one way, shape, or form started in this mindset. We're all too familiar with it, right? But yeah, I would say focus on whether or not you feel like you're using the tool properly. I understand sometimes you're in a pinch and sometimes you don't really have a choice. That happens sometimes, right? But sometimes people just have a cheap pocket knife they use for whatever, and they use it until it's completely and totally dull or it breaks or they lose it, right? And then you got to go buy another one, right? So sometimes you have to look inward. Sometimes you have to look in the mirror, Ultimately, the whole point is stop worrying about what other people are doing with their stuff. Well, it's insane to me. People, they invest so much of their time and emotional energy, their anger, into people who buy things that they wouldn't buy, collect things that they feel like shouldn't be collected. You can't do anything about it. You can't. It doesn't matter how much you fuss and cry and scream. Now, I'm not saying that it's not it's not a good idea to be passionate about your position, right? I'm not saying that there's not intelligence in taking a certain perspective. And obviously we can dissect these numbers into a bunch of different types of people with lots of different perspectives. 100%, that's perfectly fine. Again, my main goal with this poll, 100%, my main goal was to prove the statement that you might say it's ultra specific and isolated, but I'm telling you, this is so common, this statement, right? People who buy expensive knives aren't actually using them. Less than 1%. That's what I commonly get. I got it here recently, which gave me a great motivation to make this video again and to poll this topic again. This is wrong. It is incorrect. Basically, you don't know if you haven't been buying this stuff. You have to experience it for yourself, and then you can decide whether or not you want to spend your money on this, right? But the assumption is incorrect. The knife community is made up of so many different types of people, right? And you could argue infinitely that a $500 pocket knife is such a gross, you're getting such massive diminishing returns, spending all of that money on a pocket knife when you could spend way less and get one that's completely and totally functional. You can. And the magic of that statement is you have that choice and you can make it for you, but you can't make it for anyone else. Why bother? Just let people enjoy what they're going to enjoy, right? Whole goal is to prove this point. I love that these numbers are so powerful. I actually got even my assumptions were proven wrong with what percentage of people, and at least within my audience, were actually using all of their stuff or most of their stuff. And it turns out way more of you, a population of people it's really, really difficult to argue with the numbers there. So I love this. Thank you guys for participating in this poll. It's pretty rare to get 10,000 votes on a poll like this. So that's really, really cool. If you find yourself thinking, assuming, or actually commenting this all the time, I hope I gave you something to think about. Again, enjoy what you enjoy, like what you like. There are no special clubs. You don't have to get to any specific place in order to be, considered cool, right? This is what we all have in common. We all like knives. Whether you're a collector, you're a user, you're an enthusiast, or you're some hybridization, right? Whatever. We all just like knives. Just keep liking knives. It's fun. It's cool, right? I can't believe how many people there are who like knives. That's the number we should be focusing on, right? This is always fun. I like a good argument, right? I like a good, I like some good banter. This is fun. But I know already, like the vast majority of people who watch this, they had their argument ready to go 3 minutes into the video. So for those of you who made it all the way to the end, timestamp, reply with timestamp. I love it when you guys do that. I tried to cover every base. So if you know where those specific replies are, just put the timestamp down there in reply, and let's discuss it. I think it'll be fun. I think it's healthy to discuss this stuff. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.